directed. Score! Game 7! Martin St. Louis! We are going back to Tampa Bay! Lecavalier spinning. Lecavalier looking. Trying to drop it off. Brings it in himself. Left it in the middle. Shot! Score!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Thunderstruck. My name is Jake Ricker. I'm here with my good friend Michael Wax. Michael, how you doing today?
I'm good, Jake. I'm really excited to talk about our first hockey game in what feels like years, to be honest.
It is. It's great to be back. I'm very excited. Even though this was just an exhibition game, I think a lot of Bolts fans are happy to see the boys back on the ice. And, I think we should jump right into it. It was a pretty good game. I think the Bolts played very well. I think a lot of people expected to see some rust, but, overall, there wasn't much.
No, and I think the main catalyst for that is Braden Point. Braden Point was very, very good. And, we saw him and Kucherov both get 2 goals, and Schenn got a goal. But honestly, he started the game off, and he was fantastic. And then Anthony Cirelli had a shorthanded breakaway. It really felt like the boys were really trying, and I know it was only an exhibition game, but they really wanted to get their feet underneath them and not be lackluster when it comes to round robin, because a lot of people see round robin as whatever, but it's actually pretty important. And I know that I said the Bolts weren't going to win it in a previous podcast, win the round robin tournament, but it's a seeding tournament, and I definitely expect the Lightning to do well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, obviously you're going to want to play the lower seeded team. That's how those things go. So, it can play a little bit of factor. Obviously there's some things that it won't be as important in the sense of, like, if the Lightning end up losing all 3 games, they're not getting kicked out like these other teams are. But still, nonetheless, you mentioned Braden Point, and he was a huge part of this exhibition game. It seems like, his hip surgery, after now fully healing, has turned him into a different guy, because people were mentioning, he looked 10 times faster out on the ice, and Cooper was saying that it's probably because his hips have fully healed now, and it definitely showed. There was, I think, on the second goal where, he was coming down the right side, and then he just turned on the jets, got right around everybody, and put that thing top shelf. It was a great, great goal, and he showed that he can skate again. He was back to his original form, back when he was competing in the All-Star game for fastest skater. So, Braden Point could be a huge factor in these upcoming games here, like he showed in this one. But, while the game was pretty close to perfect, I think a couple things that I noticed that they could work on, I think you're going to agree with me here, was the penalties. And this was a problem for the Lightning in the regular season. They took a whole bunch of them. They had a 5-on-3 at one point, and it just seems like they always have that knack for taking silly penalties.
Yeah, totally. It was really disheartening to see the penalty trend continue. But for this game, I'm going to say it's okay, because they're, again, getting their feet underneath them. They were miles better than the Panthers when it came to skating and whatnot. But if there's one thing you don't want to do against an opponent like the Panthers, it's give them multiple power play opportunities. Luckily, the Panthers didn't score on any of their power play opportunities. They were extremely rusty. But in a normal game, you never want that to happen. So it's a little troubling to see. The power play did score a Kucherov goal on a one-timer, but it also had a couple of lapses late in the second and early in the third. Not the best power play opportunities for them. But again, I was really happy with the way that they played overall, and I can't wait to see them play again.
Yeah, and that's to be expected too with the power plays. Obviously power play percentages are a lot lower than penalty kill percentages for a reason. Speaking of the penalty kill, we talked about obviously how we would like to see them take less penalties, but I think also a positive from this was how well the penalty kill played. They killed off that 5-on-3, and even though the Panthers were rusty in their own regards, I think the penalty kill did a great job of stopping the Panthers from getting any, really good chances. Vasi, too, I think obviously needs to get a shout out. A lot of people expect him to have some rust, but he looked like he was locked in and ready to go. Obviously picking up the shutout as well, so great job by him today.
100%. You couldn't put it any better. I wasn't super happy with the fact that Vasilevsky was going to apparently get all 4 starts in the exhibition and the round robin games. I think it's good to get McElhinney in there for at least one game, if not a couple of periods overall. And then we found out before the game that McElhinney was out. We didn't find out post-game why, which is a little concerning, but it probably had to do with something about him being unfit to play. So Scott Wedgwood was the backup, and Vasilevsky played the entire 60 minutes, made some very tough saves, and picked up the shutout. And you couldn't ask for a better start to the new season if you're Andre Vasilevsky. I know, again, it's not going to go in the record books, but it's a great start nonetheless.
Right, and obviously we hope everything is okay with McElhinney. We'll have to see in the near couple of days here if any more information comes out. I don't expect more information to come out because it looks like the NHL's goal is to be, as low-key as they possibly can, but nonetheless, we'll see how that all plays out. Last thing I think we should mention about the exhibition game today was Sergachev, who got into a scrap with Brian Boyle, which I think was fun to see. It was the first official bubble fight, as fans are calling it. And it's good to see that the physicality does still remain in these games. I know we saw it a couple other times in some of the other games. I haven't watched too much of today's games, but nonetheless, it's good to see that it looks like, from what we can tell, we're not going to lose 100% of that physicality.
Yeah, I don't know if I was super happy with Sergachev getting into a fight in the exhibition game because I really want him to stay healthy and I want him to stay on the ice for the Lightning. He's a major contributor for them. But at the same time, I couldn't help but laugh the fact that it was at the expense of Brian Boyle. And a lot of Lightning fans had to come to the defense of Boyle. They're like, listen, we still love Brian Boyle. The majority of the Lightning players, they still love Brian Boyle too. But Mikhail Sergachev never played with Brian Boyle. So they hate each other. And I just found that really, really funny because I thought, well, Boyle's not going to get into a fight with any of the Lightning players. And lo and behold, the only guy he does is the guy he really just doesn't like. They also had the playoff series against each other in 2018.
That's right. But yeah, like you said, it was a good thing that nobody got hurt because that's obviously the worst case scenario coming from the exhibition games. But I think it was a positive, though, to see that there is going to be some physicality moving forward once we do get into the swing of things and we get back to a little bit of normalcy here. But let's move on. The Lightning did a great job on their games. I do want to mention, too, I think the NHL has done a very good job from what I've seen so far and from what I've watched. All the games seem to be going very well so far. I think the arenas look very nice. I like what the NHL did with, covering that lower bowl and kind of just putting their logo and branding, not putting ads like some other teams have done. I think they've done a very good job overall with the first early games and how this bubble environment is going to look.
Yeah, the two arenas, Toronto and Edmonton, we saw a picture of them a couple days ago before any of the games started, and I thought they looked great, to be honest. It was a little distracting to be watching the game, and again, this isn't an arena problem. This is an NHL problem. One of the things that I forgot to mention about the game was the terrible overarching camera that you saw throughout the game trying to follow the play. It was really bad. I'm going to be quite honest. It was absolutely horrific. And please don't do that in the actual games, NHL. For the love of God. It was really hard to follow. I said when I was covering the game, and which is true, made me nauseous. I don't want to have to do that again. But I would be okay with that if you were circling around the arena and showing like, hey, this is what we've done to like make the players feel more at home. I don't know if you noticed this, but the boards were selected for each side with home advertisements for the teams.
I did not notice that. That's pretty interesting. And you're right. The overhead angles were obviously not ideal, and you're not in the minority with many fans not being a big fan of that camera angle. I am okay though with the NHL experimenting with these new camera angles. Obviously, this is the time to experiment with things because this is 2020. This is the bubble environment, so I'm okay with them trying things out. But, obviously I hope they look and see that, okay, fans are not big on this at all, so let's make sure we don't do it going forward. Saw some people talking about this, saying that they don't think the NHL is showing everything that they plan to do. They'll probably do more different camera angles and stuff like that, and graphics and all that good stuff as we get deeper into the playoffs here. But, definitely the overhead angles were not ideal, but it will be interesting to see what they do if they continue that and how that will play out.
I don't want to get into like a massive rant here, but I think that's a terrible idea, and I'm just going to explain why for a quick second.
No, fair enough. Go ahead. Let's hear it.
The reason that you do the graphics and you do the camera angles, you do them during the preseason when nobody cares and the fans can give you feedback. We're about to enter the 2020 NHL playoffs, where somebody's going to be raising the Stanley Cup, possibly for the first time in their franchise's history, and they don't want to see an overarching camera or a corner camera where all the bodies are like bunching up against each other, and if the puck goes to the middle of the zone, you can't see it. I love those cameras for replays. They serve a purpose. But for actual playing, don't do them unless it's in the preseason when you can get tangible feedback about how it looks.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think you're right in that sense, in that this is something that you could typically do in the preseason. I still personally feel, and I think this is going to be a case-by-case basis, I am okay with them experimenting a little bit, but you're right. I do think that doing it in the preseason is the best time, but just because this is such a weird time, I think you can almost get away with it a little more than you could in a regular season. If this was a normal, as it was every day, yeah, they start doing new camera angles, people are going to freak out. Like, this is the playoffs. What's going on? But I think because we are in the 2020 bubble season, let's call it, I think there is a little more leniency, but I think you bring up a good point in that this is the Stanley Cup playoffs, and and that could happen too. Once we get into things here and get into the actual playoffs, they may stop experimenting and go back to what they've done before.
Please.
All right, let's move on to some fan questions. We actually have a couple today, so make sure if you guys do have any questions, feel free to tweet us. We often put out tweets saying that we're going to be recording soon, so if you ever have questions, let us know. We'd be happy to answer them on the podcast. Let's start off from Twitter. This one coming from @David from Tampa. He asks, what do you hope to see the team have addressed over the coronavirus break? So I think this one we can kind of talk about too. We kind of mentioned this, but what do we want to see them fix after that first exhibition game now that the coronavirus break is over? Michael, what do you got?
I'm going to go with something really simple, and I think the fact that there are no fans makes it a lot easier. Communication, because the Lightning communicated very, very well during their first game. Yes, they had a couple of odd man rushes against them. Vasilevsky came up big on those odd man rushes, but they communicated very, very well. And sometimes they didn't even need to. They knew where they were going. They knew exactly what they were supposed to do. The Panthers, meanwhile, did a terrible job of communicating. Their defense looked lackluster. Bobrovsky looked shaken in net. It really made a difference in how much these two teams talked with their own players about, we need to make sure that everybody is doing their assigned job, and if they're not, that other people are aware of that and can communicate that.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you're right. With no fans in the arena, we even us watching the games on TV, we can hear these players communicate now a lot better than we could in a regular playoff environment. So obviously a big factor in something that's very important to teams. So for me, I'm going to go with the penalty kill. I know we talked about this a little bit, so I'll keep it brief. But, I think the penalty kill, especially come playoff time, special teams is very important in the playoffs. If you make too many mistakes and you give teams an opportunity, they will score. I look at it like the Capitals, who are going to be playing in our first round robin game. If you give Ovechkin enough chances, he's a guy who can score goals easily. Obviously, we've seen him. He's a great goal scorer. He doesn't make it every time, but if you give him enough chances, he's going to make a goal. That's just, basic statistics. So cutting down on those penalties, I think, is going to be very important for the Lightning, especially, with them being such a good offensive team. They want to be able to keep that offense out there as much as they can and not try to have to sit back and kill off these penalties and have it pile up. That's my big thing for them. The thing I would think they would want to fix over the break and see them continue now after seeing the first exhibition game. Let's move over to Reddit here. We have a question from you, Cloudy Rabbit 0. He asks, with the looming expansion draft, if the Lightning do not pull it all together and win the cup, was the era of the triplets wasted? I think this is an interesting question, but for me, it's no. I think the triplets, back when they were in their full form, were a huge asset for the Lightning. They played really well, and they still are playing really well, even though they are not playing together on that specific line. And even if, for example, we think Tyler Johnson could be a popular candidate to move on from the expansion draft, from that season their value went up so much more, so they can potentially bring us in some draft picks or help us save another player getting picked on the expansion draft, whatever it may be. So I don't think it was wasted. I think it'll be a bummer for them not to have a cup as a Bolt, but because they got so far as they did in recent years in playoffs, I wouldn't say it's wasted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is really tricky to put success into what I think about the team, and specifically the triplets, if they don't win a cup before the expansion draft. Because tangibly, you want them to be able to say, we have hardware to support us. But you look at Palat was a Selke nominee or a Selke consideration person a couple of years ago, and he should be this year. I don't think he should be top even 5, but he was really good at that. Johnson was a really good goal scorer before he fell off a little bit. And Kucherov turned into a monster. He turned into one of the best players in the world. So is it a failure? No. But at the same time, I wouldn't call it success either. It's very middle of the pack, to be honest, because they didn't complete the number one goal, which is to win the Stanley Cup. But they also were extremely good when they were together.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch those guys too, which I think is a positive as well. And they can still win the cup. Obviously they're not on that line like I mentioned, but all of them are still playing an impact on the team right now. The next question from this same person was, will Killorn remain in Tampa Bay after this season? This is an interesting one. Michael, you want to take first shot at this one?
Yeah, he's probably going to leave. And the reason I say that is because Killorn has had a very good basic stats season. You look at it, he is career high in goals with 26. And I believe he's either tied or surpassed his career high in points. However, if you look at his analytic stats, he's sort of fallen off a little bit since 2017-2018, which was his best season in a Bolts uniform analytically. And he is the only one of the $4-5 million men of Gord, Palat, Johnson, and Killorn to have his no-trade clause go into a modified no-trade clause. So he's actually going to possibly get traded, and he doesn't have a say in whether or not he goes. So he's probably gone. I don't think the Lightning fans are going to be happy with the return that they get for him, because it is a large sum of money for someone that is falling analytically, if not in the basic stats. So short answer, yes, I think he's leaving.
Yeah, obviously Lightning fans are not going to be happy no matter what they get back, I think, because Killorn has turned into a fan favorite this year. He's been so much fun, and he's been great. But I would lean toward yes, he is going to leave for my short answer as well. I'm going to look at it from a little bit of a different angle here, though. My thought is he is having one of his better seasons, so you want to sell high on a guy like this. If you look at the players that could potentially leave because of cap issues and expansion draft, Killorn, Johnson, Gore, those are your top contenders there. There could be a couple other ones, but just off the top of my head. And you're more than likely maybe able to get more for a guy like Killorn than you are for a guy like Gord because of Killorn's better season. Now, that could not be true. There's a lot of factors that play into this. What kind of contracts are these other players going to sign? What does Seattle want? There's so much that plays into it. But if I had to take a guess, I wouldn't be surprised to see Killorn leave just because he is having a better year and could probably more easily sell high on Killorn. Let's go to the next one. This is also from the same person. This is, if the Lightning do not win the Cup, it is time to make a change and move on from Coach Cooper. This is an easy one for me. It's no. Obviously we want to win the Cup. That's our big expectation. Now, if they, God forbid I say it, lose in the first round, then maybe it's a different conversation. But because of the success we've had over the years with Cooper, it's mostly been conference finals. We missed the playoff 1 year, but then even a Stanley Cup finals. So, there's not much you can fault Cooper for. I think he's a very good head coach. And if we make another deep run, even potentially win it this year, I just can't see moving on from Cooper at all.
So I'm actually going to disagree with you. I'm going to say yes. And there's a method behind my madness. And we talked before the show about how I'm a Bucks fan and you're not. You're a Packers fan. But when I look back at Bucks history, they were really, really good under Tony Dungy. But they never got over the hump. It was until they fired Tony Dungy and brought in John Gruden to fix up parts of their game and get them over the hump that they won a Super Bowl. I think a very similar situation is about to happen in Tampa. God forbid they get knocked out anytime in the playoffs because I expect them to win the Cup. But if they get knocked out, especially early, you can say goodbye to Cooper and someone else is going to come in. The talent's still going to be there. They're still going to go right back at it and try to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've seen it with, teams with less talent where they fire a coach midseason, they turn it around. Next thing you know, they're playing way better than they were. I think it's definitely more likely if we end up getting knocked out early versus later. I'd like to give Cooper the benefit of the doubt and think he gets another shot at it. But, it's a fair point. I think a lot of it depends on obviously how this season turns out. I hope we win it. I would love to win it with Cooper in this current group that we have before a lot of them get moved around, but only time will tell. Last question from this person. We just have a couple more to go through. Will COVID-19 have a huge impact down the road in these playoffs, i.e. a team will have multiple positive tests and have to rest many star players on their team? For me, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact just because of what we've seen from other sports with the bubble. The NHL has done very well so far. It's still early, but having 0 positive cases coming into the bubble, and like I said, all the other sports doing very well with the bubble environment, I don't foresee a major problem. Now, obviously, if something happens and one of these players does get COVID and it starts to spread, that's another story. But from what I can tell, there's no reason for me to believe that we're going to have a major impact other than just regular injuries.
I agree. I think that these players have a plan in place similar to the NBA in where they can go and what they can do. And if one player gets COVID, the rest of the teams that are in a certain hotel are screwed because they're sharing surfaces with them. They might be asymptomatic. They might not even know. There's a lot of things that could happen if one player gets it. But with the way that they're treating it, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're fine.
Yeah, I agree. Let me go to Facebook real quick. This question coming from Nicole Lynn. She asked kind of a similar question that we can play off of here. She says, are the players in fear of playing again while hearing other sports players about getting COVID? I don't think this is the case. I haven't heard any players specifically saying anything about this. And the fact that they're even playing, obviously they had the option to opt out. So I think those players obviously have a little bit more of a concern. Not that these players don't have a concern, but And like we mentioned with how well the NHL has handled this so far, I think these players are okay with it. And if they were, I think they would have said something.
Yeah, I think if they weren't okay with it, they would have opted out. And now that they haven't, the only players that aren't with the Lightning, for example, right now are Victor Hedman. And he has an actual reason for not being with the Lightning. It had to do with his family, which is one of the ways that they said, you can leave the bubble if you have certain instances where you have to leave the bubble. So if players had something that they didn't like about the plan and the return to play in COVID, they would have said something where they would have opted out. But I think right now, I think everybody is ready and willing to go win a Stanley Cup.
Absolutely. All right, 2 more questions from one more person. Jumping back over to Reddit, this comes from Reddit user TBL Lightning 08. Why hasn't Coleman gotten a real chance with either of our first 2 lines? I believe after watching him in New Jersey, he has a lot more skill and would heavily complement by playing with any one of our top 2 lines. I think this is a really good question. I think the thing that jumps out to me with this is that the Lightning are such a deep team that it is hard to get our guys on top lines. Like you look at a guy like Johnson, for example, who plays all over the place, but can often play on the third line, for example. On many other teams, Johnson is easily on the second line, maybe even the first line. So when you have such a deep team, you're going to have that where you have talented players playing on the lower lines. It's also, factors of team chemistry, just jumbling up the lines to see to get something going. Even though he hasn't played on the top 2 lines, I don't think it's a knock against him, or it's not that he doesn't have any potential with the top 2 lines. It's just the way this team is built with so much depth.
Well, I mean, he has been in the top 6. He has been in the top 6 for the majority of the time he's been on Lightning. And I know he was mostly on the third line in this game, but he's been playing with Cirelli and Killorn a lot. And yeah, I did really like him with Goudreau and Gord in this game. But again, it really goes down to what line does he mesh with best. And if he doesn't play in the top 6 and he plays with someone like Goudreau and Gord on the top 9, I'm cool with it. You really have the first 3 lines split a lot of the time, and then the 4th line come in for a couple of minutes a game. But the third line is really solid. I understand a lot of people are pissed off that he's not getting a big role and we paid such a massive price for him. But any ways that he can help us win, I'm all for it.
Right, and I think you hit on the key point right there at the end. Any way they can help us win, at the end of the day, is if we're winning games, that's what's most important here. All right, one last question from the same user. It is, who is most likely going to give one of our players an offer sheet, and to who? With our current situation, it's almost a guarantee it's going to happen in my mind. Another good question. I think it's definitely possible that a player gets an offer sheet. We don't see offer sheets very often at all. This is something that's become a lot less common. We did see one recently, but if I had to guess, I don't know. It's tough. I honestly don't know if we will see one just because of how rare they've become. Do you see anybody, Michael?
So if there was one player I would say was going to get an offer sheet from the Lightning, it would be Mikhail Sergachev, because out of the 3 RFAs, I think the most certain that's going to re-sign is Chernak. I think a lot of people are like, well, I mean, Chernak is a couple $1 million. We could sign him for multiple years. Like, it's not that big a deal. Cirelli is going to be a little bit more difficult, and Sergachev is going to be a little bit more difficult. But since we have such a plethora of left-handed defensemen, it will be extremely difficult to get him signed and keep him on the third pair. So I think a lot of teams are going to look at that and they're going to say he's the perfect placeholder for us as a L1 or L2 on the left side for the defense. If there was a team that I think would offer sheet him, and this is big, I would go with Colorado, because Colorado is a very, very talented team. They have a ton of cap space next year. And their defense is young, and their defense is really, really good. So I think he'd slot in perfectly as the top left-handed defenseman playing alongside someone like Cale Makar, which just makes me laugh. But quiver if Colorado, which I think is a Stanley Cup contender this year, gets him for, let's say, 5 years.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I do think, though, if someone ends up trying to offer sheet a guy like Sergachev, the Lightning will do whatever they can to match that offer. But and I say this all the time, but I think it's very important to mention. Obviously, there are a ton of factors that play into this kind of thing, but it is fun to think about as a hypothetical. I know a lot of people have talked about, more jokingly, but Montreal trying to offer sheet Sergachev to get him back. But I don't think that'll happen. And even if it did, I do think the Lightning would do what they can to match that because Sergachev is such a big impact. I think that's all we've got. Michael, do you have anything else left?
Nope. I am looking forward to the Lightning's next game, which is against the Washington Capitals on Monday, August 3rd at 4 p.m. Make sure to watch it because we will actually see what it's like playing a good opponent.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us. If you did enjoy this episode of Thunderstruck, please be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our future podcast episodes. Don't forget our giveaways, too, going on right now. We have a Tyler Johnson jersey giveaway that's ending on August 3rd, the first game for the Lightning in the round robin tournament. Make sure to check our description of this YouTube video for any affiliate links to something that may give you a nice discount on something you may be interested in. And like I mentioned before, if you guys have any questions at all, be sure to tweet us. Give us a follow on Twitter so you can check out our live coverage and much more of the Lightning. So that's all for now. We'll talk to you guys later.